sprawled across North America, from the polar ice cap to the Mexican border, is a giant with 1,000 eyes. Day and night, fair weather or foul, he guards his homeland. This giant is the air defense system of North America, a vast and intricate maze of radar networks. And through the electronic eyes of this giant, we are able to see the enemy before the enemy sees us.
Radar is a unique and fascinating form of communication throughout history. Radar was especially useful in the Cold War, where radar was able to grow and improve. It could give a pilot sight beyond what the naked eye could perceive. It could warn a watchman before a threat materialized. This is the story of radar throughout the Cold War.
Radar, or radio detection and ranging, is a fascinating form of communication. It played a huge role in the Cold War on both sides. Radar was first inspired during World War II after an attempt to create a death ray that could kill a sheep at 100 paces. Scottish physicist Robert Watson Watt and his colleague Arnold Wilson knew that it could only be possible with a huge amount of power, much more than could be packed into a World War II fighter plane. The idea of a death ray sparked the inspiration of radar. Robert Watson Watt used what he learned from the death ray to invent a way for pilots to track and avoid thunderstorms. Radar went on to turn the tide of World War II in the Allies' favor.
Robert Watson Watt created the first radar. It was shown off to the British Air Ministry in 1935. The ministry was so impressed they decided to install radar technology in all their planes. Early versions of the radar played a big role in the Battle of Britain. RAF pilots had advanced warning of the Luftwaffe planes, allowing them to defend Britain and destroy the enemy planes, thus causing a victory for the Allies.
The United States and Russia were allies against Nazi Germany in the Second Great War, but after the war, things started to go awry. With the territories gained in World War II, Russia became the Soviet Union, a bigger, communist version of Russia. The US feared the Soviet Union's growing power and disagreed with the communist ideals the Soviet Union was forcing on its people. Russia hated the United States as well. They were mad at the United States for not treating them as part of the real national community. They also held grudges about the United States entering into the war too late, which cost tens of millions of Russian lives. Former allies were now known as bitter enemies. It was a face between capitalism and communism.
The United States and the Soviet Union spent about 45 years constantly threatening the other side with bigger and bigger weapons, including atomic and hydrogen bombs. This time period was known as the Cold War. It is called the Cold War because no sides engaged in open combat aside from the two proxy wars, the Korean War and the Vietnam War. It was a time of fear for Americans and Soviets alike.
With two determined enemies and new bomb technology constantly being invented, a race began. This arms race led to the creation of truly terrifying weapons. The Soviet Union tested their own atomic bomb in 1949, which provoked the United States to start making a hydrogen bomb. The Soviets followed suit. The first testing of a hydrogen bomb vaporized an island, creating a 25 square mile fireball, and blew a giant hole in the ocean floor. The role of radar suddenly became appealing as a national defense. Radar was needed to warn people if the adversary decided to launch a weapon of mass destruction.
Radar was an effective form of communication in this time period, to the point where it almost replaced the telegraph. The Cold War was exactly what radar needed to become widely accepted. With the constant fear of bombs that could wipe out large masses, the prospect of radar grew increasingly more attractive no matter the extensive cost. The United States and Canada decided they wanted to draw a line in the sand against the Soviets, so they installed 70 radar stations. Ned Roswell, a writer for the University of Alaska Fairbanks, said these stations were every 50 miles from the Aleutians to the Greenland. These radars were called the Dew Line.
The Soviet Union also built radar stations to defend against the United States and its allies. They called one of theirs the Duga Radar. Duga is a large-scale radar station that cost around 7 billion Soviet rubles. This radar station stands at a massive 462 feet high and 2,000 296 feet in length. The Soviets made sure they kept the Duga radar a massive secret, even though it was such a huge structure. The curious fact about the Duga, however, is that it made its famous and weird tapping sound.
This tapping sound was heard over radio waves and got superstitious Americans thinking. On the maps, the Duga Radar was hidden as a children's camp. Many rumors sprang up around this mysterious noise and what it could mean. Some people even went as far as to say that the Soviet Union was somehow using mind control on people through the tapping. These mysterious sounds led to the Duga Radar to be nicknamed as the Russian Woodpecker.
Radar was fast becoming very powerful, so the United States started searching for ways to avoid being detected by it. The U-2 was a spy plane that was supposed to elude radar, making itself hard to spot on the enemy's device. However, it failed its purpose when the U-2 was disabled and then shot out of the sky by Soviet missiles. The plane fell 4,000 feet before the pilot was able to bail out of the cockpit. After this accident, American planes were no longer to be flown over Soviet Union airspace. The United States then created the SR-71 Blackbird. This plane still holds the record for the fastest speed for a non-rocket powered aircraft. It can outfly a missile. It also succeeded at eluding radar, and so many other versions of the Blackbird were built. Pilots who had to fly the Blackbird planes had to wear special suits because of extreme height conditions. These jets were able to elude radar long enough not to get blown up by a missile. The spy planes were a success.
The Soviet Union finally fell apart in 1991, effectively ending the Cold War. Now, both the DU line and the Russian Woodpecker are abandoned. The DU line radars were built without environmental concerns in mind. The DU line radars began to decay as heat or cold did its best to erode them. The DU line radars were eventually given up and cleanup began. The DU line is proving to be a hassle for the U.S. The location of the radars make cleaning up very difficult. The extreme temperatures and remote locations have hampered the cleanup efforts. Unfortunately, DU line radars are still out there, not yet cleaned up.
These abandoned shells of what once was are really bad for our environment. The more we keep them on the ground, the more likely they will erode and break down. This can cause problems, with oil leaking out and seeping into the ground, deteriorating metal structures, leaking toxins into the ground, and making the areas unsafe.
Like the DU line radar stations, radar itself has its own varied effects, good and bad. The DU line radar stations are decaying and hurting the planet, and our enemies have created sophisticated radar systems, making national defense more difficult. But the good of radar far outweighs the bad. Radar has allowed for more sophisticated weather tracking and reporting of storms, keeps aircraft safe with air traffic control, and helps firefighters with wildfire tracking. Radar has also significantly helped our world in many ways.
And it also saved my life. We were up in our helicopters when we were flying. This is before I flew Apaches. They didn't have a lot of special instruments for flying in the clouds. Well, we got caught in California one time. We were headed up and coming up towards some hills, and the fog came in behind us, and the clouds came up and just pushed us up before we hit the mountains. Obviously, we didn't hit the mountains. And so that we got up there and got kind of figured out a little bit, and then we got a hold of the guys with radar, and then they said, okay, we see you, we got you, and they gave us the directions. They told us when we could go down a little lower, and they basically talked us right into landing on the runway. So there were 3 helicopters, and it saved all of us.
Radar has also dealt with air traffic problems. If it weren't for the radar, planes at airports could crash into one another without seeing it coming.
And then it can also tell if the object is moving and how fast it's going with Doppler radar, because those radio waves will kind of change if an object is moving away or towards it. And so
Radar in the Cold War was able to benefit the world in many ways, and it became a great source of communication throughout history.